Hello, everyone. I am Punk6529. You will hear me sound like Darth Vader. Apologies. That's my voice changer. I'm waiting for everyone to, I still see the participants increasing. Okay. We'll get started. I have no idea why, but Zoom has decided it is going to flip my avatar backwards. Or not backwards, left to right. And it is trimming it. And so, yes, the voice is not clear because I'm using a voice changer. So the voice will continue to not be clear the whole session. But yeah, first time this has ever happened, Zoom has flipped me around. Yeah, I'm using a voice changer because I'm not doxxed. That's why, obviously. So I'm trimmed and backwards for some reason. And so while this is vaguely disconcerting to me, we will proceed nonetheless. So I'm delighted to be here to talk to everyone. It looks like we have about 60 people, so that's a nice group. And we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects in the world, if not my single favorite subject in the world, which is NFTs. The way I like to do these sessions is I assume you have read the PowerPoint. So I am not here to read the PowerPoint to you. What I am going to do today is three things. Share some thoughts beyond the PowerPoint, general thoughts, how I think about NFTs, how I think you can consider thinking about NFTs. Second, answer the questions that were submitted by everyone before the session. And after we've done those two things, if we have some time left, we can take any questions in real time. I think we'll have time, because I don't think there were a lot of questions submitted before class. So I am going to go through in that order. So let me start with the big picture. The most abstract way of thinking about this. What is a non-fungible token and how does it differ from a fungible token? And the only difference is that the non-fungible has a number. Literally just a number. What do I mean by that? There are 21 million Bitcoins and 100 million Ethers, and they're interchangeable. There's no Ether number 6529. There is a token, though, called CryptoPunk 6529. And there's also a CryptoPunk 1 and a CryptoPunk 9500 and a CryptoPunk 6528 and a CryptoPunk 6530. I want to emphasize this because it is very easy to get lost, confused, mixed up by deep, complicated things about NFTs. And that's totally fine. There are a lot of interesting and deep and complicated things about NFTs. But the thing that you have to remember is simply that an NFT is a token, just like any other token, except each one has its own number. All of the magic about NFTs, all of the wow about NFTs comes down to the fact that we put numbers on the tokens. That's it. And you're going to say now, like, wow, that doesn't sound like a tremendous innovation to put numbers on a token. And it's true when we're talking about it now. In retrospect, it sounds very straightforward. But in practice, proto NFTs didn't appear till 2014, 2015. NFTs like we know them on Ethereum, kind of 2017. So it turns out it was not 1,000% obvious idea in the beginning to do this. Though in retrospect, it's of course very obvious. And then the second thing you might think about is like, well, what's the big deal about having a number? Well, it turns out having a number is one of those extremely deceptively simple things that it looks like nothing, like a nothing burger, like a type of thing that a 7-year-old could understand. But the implications of that number are massive. And in fact, it is the type of thing that a 7-year-old can understand. People get themselves very confused about NFTs. But it is. You might know a 7-year-old, and a 7-year-old might like baseball cards, or football cards, or Matchbox cars, or dinosaurs, dolls, depends on the 7-year-old. And one of them is different than another one. And the 7-year-old can understand that. Probably a 3-year-old can understand that. Well, if you understand that, that's all you need to know to understand NFTs. There's a bunch of details, of course, which we'll talk about, and a bunch of technical things that people argue about, which we may talk about. But the important thing is that they are tokens that live on the same decentralized public blockchains as all the other tokens, except those tokens have numbers on them. And again, I'm not being dense, I'm not being slow, you're wondering, like, is this mastering Web3 for 3-year-olds? No, it is not mastering Web3 for 3-year-olds. It is, however, I have spoken to tens of thousands of people about NFTs, and people tend to get extremely confused about the substance, where the substance is very easy. So what do we mean when there's a number on the token? In one of my Ethereum wallets, strictly speaking, in one of my Ethereum smart contracts, a safe contract, which is a multi-sig wallet, there is a token, one of the 10,000 tokens of the CryptoPunks contract, specifically the token 6529. And that token is sitting in my wallet. It is not sitting in anyone else's wallet. It can only be in one wallet at a time. just like your car is either in your garage or it's at the parking lot at the mall. Likewise, CryptoPunk token 6529 is in wallet. I think it begins CD 6400. I forget the rest. But it's there and it's not somewhere else. Just to be clear, it's there and it's not somewhere else. There's not another token from the CryptoPunk contract with the number 6529 that is somewhere else. There's only one token. They started and they minted the token, and one had a higher number than the next one. And they keep going and they get to 6529, and that was a token. And it bounced around a lot of people's wallets. And in 2021, I did an atomic swap, which is a trustless exchange on Ethereum, and 99 ETH left my wallet, and one CryptoPunk 6529 token left other person's wallet and came into my wallet, and I eventually put it in my multisig. Why am I harping on this again like we're all like 5 years old? Because one of the most common things that I hear is, how do you know what's real in NFTs? How do you know, oh, you have this JPEG. You have this JPEG of Punk 6529. And a lot of people for a long time on Twitter, where I tweet a lot, would right-click Save As, my avatar, and then they'd put it on their Twitter account. And they would say, ha-ha, gotcha. Checkmate, 6529. I also have your JPEG. And like, I don't know, 50% of people when they first learn about NFTs have this reaction. I want you to think about for a second before I answer it. Why is that reaction not just wrong? It's dumb. It's like trivially wrong. It's like a little kid trying to do thinking the world disappears when they put their hands over their eyes wrong. They can't see the world, it's not there. No, they just cover their eyes. And the reason is, of course, Punk 6529 is not the JPEG, it's the token. Anyone can make a copy of the JPEG. In fact, right now, when I logged into Zoom and my normal avatar was not there that I expected it to be, I ran around and went to Google Images and searched myself and found my avatar, and I right-click saved it myself. And it's sitting on the downloads folder of my computer. And I uploaded it to Zoom. And so it's sitting on some image server on Zoom. And Zoom almost certainly is using a content delivery network. So this has now been replicated. It's now been replicated on a bunch of servers around the world. And each one of those JPEGs is exactly the same. It's a picture perfect copy. I mean, I don't understand the comment in the chat that JPEGs deteriorate. Nothing happens to JPEGs. Normal photographic negatives deteriorate over time. Paintings deteriorate over time. But JPEGs are a bunch of pixels. Nothing's going to happen to them. They're a bunch of zeros and ones. Okay. Does Zoom now own Punk 6529? Does Zoom Limited, the company to which I've uploaded this now, own my CryptoPunk? Have I made a tragic mistake? I don't know how much hoodies cost these days. I'm not a price type of guy. $500,000. Like, did I just give $500,000 to Zoom? If not, why not? Why didn't I give $500,000 to Zoom? The reason, of course, is the token is sitting right there in my wallet where it was before. And in order to move that token, you can't right-click save it. You have to sign with the private key of my address. Actually, since it's a multi-sig, you have to sign with the private key of multiple addresses. And so you can right-click save as all you want, but the token itself is protected by the power of extremely complicated cryptography. Imagine by way of analogy, I had a Bitcoin wallet and it had 3 Bitcoins in it. I think that's what a hoodie punk costs on, if it's 2 or 3 or 2.5 or whatever, something like that. And I showed it to you. Here's my wallet. Here's my Trezor ledger. I opened up the software. I showed you my ledger software, my Trezor software. I'm sharing my screen. You can see that it says 3 Bitcoin. And someone took a screenshot and then posted it on Twitter to say, haha, checkmate 6529. I have your Bitcoin. Have they done anything? Have they actually stolen my Bitcoin? If they post on Twitter the Bitcoin logo with 3, it's very obvious, I think, to anyone, even a non-crypto native person, that if you have screenshotted my screen showing that I own 3 Bitcoin and start running around flexing that, you have not, in fact, stolen my Bitcoin. And in fact, you look ridiculous. People get confused because there's a JPEG. They think the JPEG is what matters, or the video, or the text, or the game, or the puzzle, or the link to something else. There's nothing to be confused about. It is a token, just like Bitcoins. Bitcoins are not, strictly speaking, tokens because Bitcoin doesn't use a token model. It uses a UTXO model, but nonetheless, those cannot be stolen. They cannot be right-click saved as. You have to have the private key. Now, if you steal my private key and sign away my Bitcoins and move them to your address, and if you stole my hardware devices and moved it out of my multi-sig, yeah, sure, then you would actually own it. Someone just said in the chat, it's pretty much saying taking a picture next to the Maserati on the parking lot and saying UNIC. Yeah, something like that. Everyone's like, oh, that's a picture that's on a Maserati. Yeah, but like, again, the question to ask someone who says that, because everyone's going to say this to you, is like, okay, you've stolen my JPEG. Okay? Sell it. Since you own my Punk 6529, go sell it to someone. How much will someone pay you for your downloaded Punk 6529? I can tell you how much. Absolutely zero. Because obviously anyone else can go with 10 seconds of effort at zero money. Also right-click save as Punk 6529. There are thousands of copies around the world of the JPEG Punk 6529, and possibly many, many more. And if someone wanted to write a script, they could write a script to copy the file on their computer, and a couple of hours later, there'd be, I don't know, 1 billion versions, copies of the Punk 6529 JPEG. Does this remind you of something? What's the difference between those JPEGs and the token? What's the difference between me saying, I am going to make a cryptocurrency by handing out pieces of paper, versus I'm going to do it with something like Bitcoin? It is the double spend problem. It is the duplication problem, right? And so, same thing would exist. If you wanted to sell 3 Bitcoin, you get $300,000 for them today, plus or minus, whatever, 330, 320. If you wanted to sell a picture of my wallet with 3 Bitcoins in it, you would get exactly $0 for the picture. Because you don't own a Bitcoin, you own a picture of it. When you copy paste Punk 6529, you do not own Punk 6529. You own a screenshot of Punk 6529. You own a copy of 6529. You do not own Punk 6529. Punk 6529 is the token. I am harping upon this because if you remember only one thing, you have to remember this. Every single other concept, every single other thing that people get wrong is a derivative of this concept. Weird. Weird. It shouldn't be, but it is. It's a derivative of this concept. I mean, the image of Punk 6529 is nowhere to be found on the CryptoPunk contract. It was shown later. Just a token. So, with that, what do NFTs mean? Well, I think a useful framework to think about Bitcoin is that it's a database. It's a database of, let's say, money. Today, there's a big chunk of the CryptoPunk community, the crypto community, thinks of it as gold. It's fine, either one. I think it's better thought of as money, but nonetheless, it doesn't make a difference. It's a database. It represents 21 million Bitcoins. And the only interesting thing about Bitcoin is that nobody's in charge, right? It is a decentralized database. It was the single biggest breakthrough that underlies the whole space, right? Like Cryptocurrency is worse in every single way except for the fact that it's decentralized. It's slower, it's more expensive, it uses resources. Every single, every single time it is every single metric is worse than a database. I take a side note on this chat about every time JPEGs are saved. I think people are saying different thing. If you have a JPEG, an actual JPEG, and you copy it, you don't lose any data. You're saying if you open it in Photoshop and you save it, there's a compression algorithm, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's obviously not what people are talking about when they steal your JPEG. So for all this pain of having decentralization, it's slow, it's energy inefficient, it's doesn't have a customer support line, there's hacks all the time, people lose their stuff, it's a disaster. What do you gain? You gain permissionlessness. It's the only digital thing that you will ever interact with that is yours. Your Google account is not yours, your Facebook account is not yours, your Uber account is not yours. Right? Like it's the only thing that you actually own digitally that is definitively yours. There's, I want a file on my computer. Yeah, but a file on your computer is not. You can't give it to someone else. You can't transfer it. You can copy it. You can't transfer it. It's the only thing you own that's yours. And so fungible coins, the whole $3 trillion of fungible coins can be thought of as a decentralized database that has different uses. Bitcoin is gold, Ethereum is smart contracts, world computer, or whatever people think Ethereum is. Oil, they say now. But it is a database. And I don't know how many developers we have here, if any. Some, maybe. It's a database where the only allowable type is a number. Obviously, by any modern standard, this is the dumbest database of all time. Databases, of course, can hold text, they can hold numbers, they can hold images, they can hold arrays, they can hold all types of things. They can hold, there's specialized ones for geographic information, blah, 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 blah. Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, Monero, Blast, EOS, Link, blah, 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 blah. They're all databases for numbers. That's it. NFTs are decentralized, permissionless databases for every other thing in the world. Everything that is not a number. One of the things that I say often and often, and people may or may not believe me, but nonetheless, I'm right and they're wrong. There is nothing more misunderstood in the crypto world than NFTs. Because the normal thing people will say on NFT is, here, let me run through all of the normal theories of NFTs, and that's fine, they're all correct, they're just not the big picture. You can have profile pictures. We're looking at one here. It serves as a form of avatar, identity. Do we have those? Sure, we have those on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram, but they're not owned by you. They're just a picture on someone else's server. Okay. You can have art. NFTs are obviously the native substrate for digital art. There's nothing even remotely close. What would be an alternative substrate for digital art? Someone's cloud server? aka someone's computer in a database, in a data center somewhere, a USB stick. In either of those cases, how do you know the digital art hasn't been copied? Right? The only, oh, someone's going to give you a physical piece of installation that's wrapped around the digital piece. Artists used to do that. All of these are clunky workarounds from before we had solved the double spend problem. The only way you can really own a piece of digital art without any doubt that you own it, only you own it, someone else doesn't own it, is the NFT. There's no other way. The in-game objects, sure. Notice these things that I'm telling you can be natively on-chain because they're intangibles. What else could you put on-chain? Intellectual property. Collectibles. Anything that does not necessarily need a physical presence to operate. And so all of those are natively on-chain, and they're exactly as natively on-chain as Bitcoin or Ethereum. And because they're natively on-chain, because they do not require bridges to the off-chain world, it's what has gone first and what will continue to develop now. Because you don't need bridges. And you say, okay, natively on-chain, intangibles. Are there a lot of intangibles in the world? Well, that's a very interesting question. I have heard about a zillion times from Bitcoin maxis, of which I am a Bitcoin maxi, just to be clear, but not that type of Bitcoin maxi. That Bitcoin is going to be very valuable because gold is worth $20 trillion. And today, Bitcoin is worth 2 to 3, so say, oh, it's going to be at least worth a million something. And then they say, well, maybe also money supplies, M0 is another 20 trillion. We throw around these types of numbers. These are very big numbers, obviously. Well, just on corporate balance sheets, intangibles are about $80 trillion. And are all intangibles on corporate balance sheets? Certainly not. All of the artistic, intellectual output of humanity pre-1923 that is now in the public domain is not on a corporate balance sheet somewhere, but it means a lot. National symbols are very important. They mean a lot. Are they on a corporate balance sheet? No. Does the Statue of Liberty have value? Yes. What's the value? Is the value the raw metal? No. It's an intangible asset of the United States that says something about what the United States means. And that intangible asset is worth billions. I don't know about trillions, but billions for sure. It's not on a corporate balance sheet somewhere. So intangibles as such are probably 100 trillion globally, of which right now, intangibles owned in a definitively provable, composable, decentralized, unhackable, uncopyable, unforgeable substrate is about $10 billion. So 1% of 1,000 of 1/1,000. So about 1/100,000th of the world's intangibles are today represented by an NFT. My view is that at a bare minimum, any digital intangibles, it is comical to represent them any way other than an NFT. Utterly comical. If someone tried to sell me now a digital intangible in some other substrate, I would laugh at them. And so that's bucket one. Then the other bucket that people like to talk about is quote unquote RWAs, real world assets. Now, Total global assets are about $400 trillion. You hear bigger numbers sometimes in the quadrillions, but that's because people are double counting derivatives. The actual number is around 400 trillion. Of those 400 trillion, over 300 trillion are non-fungible, starting with the largest one of all, real estate. Real estate is on the 250 to 400 trillion, and it is very much non-fungible. My house is different than your house. Your apartment's different than the other person's apartment. Even in the same building, the apartment on the 13th floor looking left is different than the apartment on the 19th floor looking right. And so sometimes people say, and they're not incorrect, that the big opportunity for NFTs is non-fungible tangibles, which is a complicated way to say real world assets. Is that in principle an even bigger way to even bigger market than intangibles? Yes, in principle. However, real world assets are very, very different. If there's a contract, CryptoPunk 6.5, CryptoPunk contract, and there's a 6529 token, and it's in your wallet, it's done. You have no reliance on any third parties. It is natively permissionless. If we say, my house is represented by this NFT, 6529's house, that is not at all native, not at all permissionless, not at all code is law. It in fact requires the full off-chain legal and enforcement system to collaborate for it to be actually viable. What do I mean by that? If someone transfers me their CryptoPunk token, that's it. There's no backseas, like it's in my wallet, it's not in their wallet. We're done. If I transfer you the 6529's house's NFT, and I've sold it to you for $1 million, and then you show up to take possession, and I lock the door, and I don't give you the key. Now what? And I say, oh, look, your NFT is in my wallet. And I'm going to say, that's really cool, but I'm inside the house and you're not. And I say, but yeah, but it's a contract and it says so. And I say, no, I understand that. That's super nice. And I really appreciate the $1 million you gave me. But I'm inside the house. I have the key to the house. You're outside the house. You don't have the key to the house. Get off my lawn. And then how that resolves has to do with a whole bunch of complicated legal topics that are going to be different in every country. First of all, can you legally transfer a piece of real property in your country using a NFT transfer? Typically, the answer is no. Land registries have very specific rules for what you transfer and very conservative rules for how you transfer because people don't like accidentally losing their house. So the first thing that needs to happen is the lawmakers in a country have to change the law and say, we accept that you can somehow register these transfers in the land registry office. And this is non-trivial because obviously someone is going to get their wallet hacked and someone is going to transfer out their home NFT. And even though when someone gets their wallet hacked and someone transfers out their Bored Ape, it's sad and maybe not quite a tragedy, but sad, and someone might have lost a lot of money and maybe some emotional value. And they're sad that someone has stolen their Bored Ape. But if someone loses their actual house, it's a whole different level of issue. And the state, if you go and say, so now the buyer says, no, I need the state to enforce it. Oh, how would the state enforce it? Well, you have to go to court. You have to have a trial. You have to win the trial. The trial, once the trial is won, someone has to enforce it. Who's that person? The police, ultimately. Ultimately, the way that real property can be transferred in the physical world at the end of the chain requires the police to come physically evict me. And this whole process is years long. Even if you're doing things off chain. And so to do it on chain, you need to have a state, a municipality, a state in the United States, a country willing to say, we are going to represent people's homes as NFTs, and we're going to have a mechanism to disambiguate whether it was a proper sale or a theft or a North Korean hacker has now gotten 6529's home, and we're willing to go through, integrate this with our systems and go through all of this in court and be willing to take 6529 at the end of the barrel of a gun out of his home because the NFT's in someone else's wallet. I'm not saying we don't eventually end up there, but I am saying we are currently not even close. Okay. And so, what could you see as real world assets that happen faster? Lower risk things. If I wanted to sell tickets to my Taylor Swift concert, could I represent that each ticket as an NFT? Could I let people trade them? Could I take a royalty on every trade? Yeah. And do I need the whole legal system to go along with this? No, I just need at my concert hall to accept a signature of that NFT to put you in ticket 37B. Ah, it's possible. Could I sell you a Birkin bag? That's an example that someone put in the questions. And have an authenticity marker. Maybe it is a QR code or an RFID chip in the bag itself that you can check online if it's real. Sure, that could work, but that's not ownership. That's verification of provenance. If that NFT was transferred, does that make the Birkin bag transfer? If I go to OpenSea and sell my Birkin bag NFT to someone in China, is there some magic mechanism by which my Birkin bag has now ended up in China? No, there's no mechanism whatsoever. And because the person in China has to rely on the exact same risky things they need to rely on when they're buying a Birkin bag from me on eBay, there is not an obvious major win on physical goods, on physical property that is going to drive very fast adoption on this. I believe real world assets will come much later. I think real world services will come somewhere in the middle. If I were running a hotel, here's an example I give people. A few years ago, I was going to go to not NFT NYC, Consensus. And it was the Hilton in Midtown. And the Hilton was sold out, quote unquote. Now, the Hilton in Midtown has, I don't know, 400 rooms. When you say it was sold out, I am certain that 400 people had booked a room. But I'm almost certain that whoever the person least interested in having a room that night in the Hilton wanted the room less than I did. So if each room night was represented as an NFT, those NFTs could be on OpenSea. There could be a market in those NFTs, a floor price, a bid. And me, sophisticated crypto participant who really wanted to be in the conference hotel, because it would be convenient, might have been willing to pay $400 a night for the hotel. But Sally and Bob from Connecticut, who had booked their big city weekend 6 months earlier and booked the room for $200, but are retired, and it makes no difference to them if they're the Hilton this weekend or the next weekend. It's probably worse for them to be there with a bunch of crypto maniacs. They might be happy to take $400 from me for the $200 room that they booked. Come the next week and pocket $200, and Hilton might say, look, I'm going to impose a mandatory royalty of 15%, and they'll take $30 too. And suddenly you have a secondary market in hotel rooms. You say, well, why do you need NFTs to have a secondary market in hotel rooms? For the same reason you need the internet to have a global market for the exchange of information. We had content management systems, in fact, network content management systems before the internet. Each one was proprietary. Because they were proprietary, it was very hard for them to integrate, and it never really totally took off. HTTP, TCP/IP, all these things are deceptively simple. NFTs are deceptively simple. The true and interesting nature of NFT isn't if you should use this format and you should save it on Arweave or IPFS, if art blocks NFTs are truly on chain, what's going on with gaming NFTs. All of these things are interesting enough, but they are not fundamental. We can talk about them in the second part of the class, but they are not at all fundamental. What is fundamental is that they are a decentralized database for non-fungible objects. Non-fungible objects are the non-fungible things. Non-fungible things are the vast majority of social value, economic value in the world. Of those, about a third are intangible and 2/3 are tangible. The intangible ones can migrate first and migrate faster. And not first and faster by a little bit, first and faster by a lot. Because you don't need anyone's permission, you don't need off-chain bridging, you don't need access to enforcement in the physical world. The enforcement happens cryptographically. And then in time, we will see real-world services followed in the end by real-world products, and in the very end, real-world property, which will also be represented by NFTs. In a very strange way, and I note that many things I will tell you are 100% consensus, that NFTs are numbered tokens, that real-world assets work the way they work. All of these are consensus. If you ask any one of 500 people like me, they'll tell you the same thing. What is my non-consensus belief is that I believe in the fullness of time, NFTs will carry more value than fungible coins. This is deeply non-consensus. It is possible that I'm wrong, because there's today $3 trillion in fungibles and $10 billion in non-fungibles. But my theory is very simple. I just look around. The world is primarily non-fungible. And I ask myself, is the world going to become more digital? Of course it's going to become more digital. Is there value in being able to exchange value online? Yes. Is there value to being able to exchange non-fungible value online? Yes. Are the AIs coming to life going to be working primarily in the digital world or in the physical world? The digital world. And so the end state of all of this is that a tremendous amount of activity will eventually be transacted by NFTs. It is very different than kind of consensus, not non-crypto opinion, than consensus crypto opinion about NFTs. Consensus crypto opinion is, they made some stupid monkeys. They made some art that may or may not be interesting, but okay, I'm not an art guy or gal Who cares about this stuff? And to me, that is looking at the specifics, not at the principles. You're looking at the implementation, not the principles. The interesting thing about the CryptoPunks is not that in and of itself, this CryptoPunk is extremely useful. The interesting about the CryptoPunk is that it proves a certain concept. And in a way that is staggeringly more, what's the word I'm looking for? Rare, right? Super rare. Than anything else in the crypto world. And I'll say this is absolutely not financial advice, right? But like, there's no doubt objectively the most valuable tokens in the world are going to be NFTs. That's already true today. The most expensive NFT sales in the world were 5 million and 10 million and 20 million. There's not a lot of them, but obviously they are the most valuable tokens in the world. If Bitcoin's worth 100 grand, the most valuable NFT in the world is always going to be worth more than a Bitcoin because they are staggeringly, shockingly, extremely rare, the important NFTs. And so they are arguably the most provably rare objects humanity has ever made. I know that sounds weird and non-intuitive, but if you think about it, there's probably about 1 billion pieces of art in museums and private collections. There's probably about, I don't know, less than 100,000 NFTs that NFT collectors consider important, and less than 10,000 very important, and less than 1,000 ultra super important. And the difference, of course, nobody knows how many important pieces of art there are. It's an unknowable question. And nobody even knows of any particular piece of art how likely it is that it's real. I tweeted out a story a few years ago. And I'm going to say it again because, again, it's important on the. A lot of people here have probably not bought an expensive piece of art and have probably not bought an expensive NFT. And so it's useful to think about this mental model. My whole life as an adult, I wanted an Andy Warhol soup can. And eventually, in around 2017, 2018, I had enough money to consider it. And I found a one for sale in New York, in Soho, and I went into the store, the gallery, and I said, I'd like to buy this tomato soup can. And they said, great. And I said, how much does it cost? And they said, $140,000. And I said, why does it cost this price and not some other price? And effectively, the answer was, well, because we say so, more or less. And I say, fine, how do I know it's real? And he turns it around and says, Lucy, look here, there's Andy Warhol's signature on it. And if you've grown up now in cryptographic signatures, you're listening to this, you're saying this is totally ridiculous. Obviously, the person who's going to go to the trouble of faking a whole Andy Warhol soup can is also going to fake the signature. And I said, yes, I understand, but how do you know the signature is real? And I said, oh, well, we're a respected gallery, and we're going to give you this certificate of authenticity. And he goes to his computer and he prints it out. And I said, but like this certificate of authenticity you just printed out, I just watched you printing it out. It's just a piece of paper. Like, why does it mean anything? Like, how do you know it's real? You're putting your gallery's name behind it, and you're a respectable gallery, and I appreciate that, and I definitely want the certificate of authenticity, but like, how do you know to give this to? And then the hand waving starts. Well, we bought it from this German collector, and he had it in his closet for 40 years, and it's in good condition, and hand waving and all this stuff. And I'm sitting here, and I'm like, good Lord, if I don't go through with the purchase now, I'm never going to buy one of these things because the whole thing's a bunch of hand waving. And so, like, I'm pretty sure I own an Andy Warhol soup can. But, like, I'm not 100% sure. I wouldn't bet my life on it. but I'm 100% sure I own 0.6529. And this is not some weird thing that applies to me and then applies only to art. You might think this has nothing to do with me. I'm not the type of person who's going to pay 100 grand for a piece of art or 100 grand for a punk. This weird guy. No, I hear you. I understand that it's not necessarily particularly relatable, but it's the same topic for everything. It's the same topic. It doesn't, every single intangible is like this. So with that, let's knock through the questions because they're easy. Does it matter what network you choose when creating an NFT? What are the other considerations besides fees? Well, no, I mean, from a technical perspective, it does not matter at all. NFTs work in broadly similar ways, with the exception of Bitcoin, that's not really designed for them. And on Bitcoin, they work in like stupid and convoluted ways because it's not really designed for that type of thing. So technically, it doesn't matter. It does matter practically because different chains have different, the art people like to say provenance, but the financial people might say liquidity. I'll make it simple. Almost all of the value and activity in NFTs is on Ethereum mainnet today. So if you have an equally, you're an artist, you're known to some level of quality, and you mint the same NFT on Ethereum mainnet, or on Base, or on Shape, or on Tezos, or on Solana, or on Mona, or God forbid on Berachain, the amount of money that someone is going to pay for that NFT will be highest on Ethereum mainnet, because most of the people who collect NFTs collect them on Ethereum mainnet. And why is that? Well, because I do not necessarily have any high level of confidence that in 50 or 100 or 20 years, any particular L2 on Ethereum will be around. But I have reasonably high confidence, not 100%, but Ethereum itself will be around. And because everyone thinks this way, you actually have liquidity. Not a lot by fungible coin standards, but like by NFT standards, most of the liquidity is on Ethereum mainnet because everyone thinks this. So the other consideration other than fees has to do with what is the purpose that you are minting it. If you're minting it for fun, it doesn't matter where you mint it. If you're minting it to experiment, it doesn't matter. If you're minting it to do some type of collaborative activity with 10 of your friends, it doesn't matter. If it's all these cases, I would pick whichever has the lowest fees. If you're minting it because you're hoping to sell it to someone because you are some form of creator, if you can afford to do it on Ethereum mainnet, it's probably in your interest to do so. If you are minting it not because you want to sell it, not because you want to play around, but you want it to exist for a long time, I would also do it on Ethereum mainnet for broadly similar reasons. Is it safe to buy NFTs? Does it follow the same security protocol as blockchain? It is exactly as safe or unsafe as buying an Ethereum token, an ERC20 token. It is cryptographically very safe. But if someone gets access to your private key, you can kiss your NFT goodbye in the same way you would kiss your ETH and ERC20 tokens goodbye. It is your responsibility to maintain the security of your wallets. There's no one else is going to do it for you. Series of questions. When an NFT collection is sold, does the buyer gain the right to download and store the associated digital asset for personal safekeeping, or is access limited to viewing it through the blockchain platform? There is no such thing. There is no blockchain platform with pictures in it. NFTs are either code that is put into the blockchain that you can render into an image, generative art. They are, in some very rare cases, the image itself shoved into the data of the blockchain, but you can't really get high quality images that way. And even then, it's not like there's a blockchain art platform. You download a block and you can decide to render it. Or they are links to decentralized storage like Arweave or IPFS, or they are links to centralized storage, their own server. There is no blockchain platform it's on. There is no Ethereum place for NFTs. And so not only you can download your associated digital asset for personal use, someone else can. It doesn't help you with anything. I mean, you're not keeping anything safe. The token is the NFT. How can creators safeguard their NFT collections from being copied or reminted by others who attempt to create near identical versions? I don't want to be facetious, but by being famous. If someone today went and minted the CryptoPunks contract the second time and tried to make a fake CryptoPunks collection, not with near identical versions, with identical versions, the number of people who would buy those punks are zero, because everyone knows which one the CryptoPunks contract is. There's nothing you can do to stop someone from minting something on chain. On chains are permissionless. But let's say you're an artist and you have a following and you have 500 collectors and you mint your collection and your collectors buy it and you have a Twitter account and I don't know, an email newsletter, or you get together with them at your local coffee shop or museum. The way your collectors know which one is your collection is you tell them. That's it. There's no police that are checking if you are minting something on chain if it's someone else's. Just like there are no police who are checking at the art supply store when you buy canvas and paint if you're going to make original work or if you're going to copy someone else's work. There's no such thing in the physical world. There's no such thing in the digital world. What technical and or legal measures can be implemented to verify the authenticity of an NFT collection and ensure the buyers are purchasing original authorized work than replicas? I believe effectively none. I believe the way to know that you are buying a original Artist X collection is you should ask Artist X. If Artist X is dead, you should ask their estate. If you're concerned about reaching out to the artist or the estate, ask a large collector or there's some emerging dealers in the NFT space. Just like you would if you said, how do I make sure I buy a original Warhol, except much, much better, much more likely that someone could just say, yep, this is the CryptoPunk contract. If you have bought off this contract, you have a CryptoPunk. If you have bought anywhere else, you do not have a CryptoPunk. Objects saved on chain. I do not understand how objects or records are published on the blockchain. In the rare case NFTs stored directly on the blockchain, is the image itself published on chain in the same way it would be on a traditional Web2 website? If not, what are the differences with Web2? When you're talking about on-chain art, primarily we're talking about generative art. Generative art is you publish the code that makes the art. Why? Because it is much, much more space efficient. Blockchains are not made to move around a lot of data. People can, up to a few megabytes, brute force an image directly onto the blockchain into various storage areas. in which case it's exactly the same way as it would be anywhere else, but you can't really do big high resolution things. So now we get to some more technical questions. I have a question regarding ERC 721 contracts. When launching a standard Open Zeppelin NFT ERC contract through Remix, for example, Pinata as the IPFS, is it possible to change the NFT pictures after the contract is launched? In the contract, it references the CID of the JSON file, including the metadata, and in the JSON file, it references the CID of the picture. Can you switch out the JSON file after the contract is deployed to reference new picture CIDs? The short answer is it depends how your NFT contract is structured. Your NFT contract can give you the right to change what URL CID it is pointing to. And it can also give you the right to renounce that right. Or it could also be a contract that doesn't have that right at all. If I recall correctly, an Open Zeppelin contract does allow you to change it unless you renounce it, but don't quote me on that. I didn't go check, but it's easy enough to check and figure this out. I mean, that's a GPT-5 Pro will answer that question. However, the general principle is it depends on the contract. And why is this interesting? Well, because there are times that you want to change it, and there might also be times that you want to not be able to change it. If you can change it, the nice thing you can do is update NFTs in ways that require updating. So that's good. What's the downside to that? Well, let's say you're trying to sell an NFT that has whatever it has as the metadata. A buyer across the fullness of time, years, decades, centuries, might prefer that what the NFT points to isn't dependent on you or your heirs or the executor of your estate continuing to keep the private key of the admin address safe for decades and centuries. If you're 100% sure that this is done, that you don't want to change it, you might, in a case like that, want to renounce it. Take away the right to be able to do that. It is situation dependent. All right, do I think NFT collections like Claynosaurs or Pudgy Penguins have a realistic chance of becoming household names by branching into cartoons and plushies? If not, what do you think is holding them back? Well, I can answer the second part of the question. The second part of the question is, what is holding them back is that it is very hard to become a household name in anything for any reason, in any mechanism. They're one of the hardest things in the world. Ask yourself, if you wanted to create anything and you wanted it to become a household name, what would that entail? It's hard. So what's holding them back is that they have set for themselves an extremely ambitious goal. Now, of the two, Pudgies are closer than Claynosaurs, I think, to getting there. But I still think it's relatively low probability just because this would be the same. Let's say Pudgy Penguins were not NFTs. Let's say they just started off as a plush toy company. And they said, what do you think the chance is of the Pudgy Penguins becoming a household name? I would also say pretty low. The Pudgies have done way better than anyone could possibly have expected in terms of real world partnerships. Now, then there's a third question that's not asked there. If those real world partnerships are super duper successful, does that mean anything for the Pudgy Penguins NFTs? I have no idea. I have no idea. It might be good for Pudgy Penguins, the company, and might be neutral to mildly positive for the NFT owners. Because the way the collection's set up today, it's not as if the Pudgy Penguins sell a lot of plushies in Walmart, every Pudgy Penguin gets a dividend check or something. It's not how it's set up. It's not set up that way because it's illegal in the United States to be set up that way. Your security opens up a whole other can of worms. But it's an open question of what this stuff means for the NFT holders. All right, long topic, but easy question. I'd like to understand better the process of creating a new NFT. I imagine creating an NFT is like creating a work of art, a film, a music album, or even a car where the creator of the product starts an idea and concept, and the steps to reach the point of sale are similar to the steps and logistics of the NFT creation process, slide 35 to 42. It is understood that an NFT, unlike a traditional product, is anchored to a blockchain like Ethereum. By the principles we started this discussion with, the process of creating an NFT itself is more like the process of creating a database or adding an entry to a database. The process of what that NFT points to is all the other stuff you said above. In other words, the process of minting is like adding another video to the database back in YouTube. The process of how you made your specific YouTube video, well, it depends. Is your video paragliding off Mount Everest? Is it some weird guy talking about NFTs? Is it your cooking show? I don't know. Nobody knows. It depends. So that process is whatever it is. The process of minting the NFT is something like adding another entry to a database. In your conclusions, you mentioned the future NFT depends on the integration of various industries. Can you give some example of industries? Sure. Art, collectibles, gaming, services, real estate. All the things you said at the beginning. This might seem like a simple question, but I've been reflecting on the psychology and regulation of ownership in the NFT space. Regulation. In traditional collecting, people often enjoy possessing and publicly displaying their assets. Part of the value comes from being recognized as the owner. This is true, but the word often is carrying a lot of weight there. Plenty of people have collected art, and they're not running around publicly displaying it, wanting to be recognized as the owner for a variety of reasons, including not wanting publicity, not wanting someone to come steal their stuff, etc., etc., etc. However, in the NFT world, ownership can remain entirely anonymous. Okay. I mean, in the physical world, ownership can remain entirely anonymous. If I paint a picture and give it to Lambis, and Lambis does not want to flex all over everyone in class or at the university or in his social circle that he owns an original 6'5" to 9" painting. By the way, I assure you it'd be atrocious. I have very bad hand-pen coordination. But nonetheless, Lambis can choose to remain entirely anonymous. Nobody's forcing Lambis. There's no moral obligation for Lambis to come flex that he owns this painting. There's no regulatory obligation that he doesn't. The police aren't going to come to his house and say, look, buddy, you better start flexing this painting on Twitter, otherwise you're breaking the law. We continue. So from a regulatory perspective, should ownership of high value or luxury digital assets be disclosed, similar to how some jurisdictions require transparency for physical assets? When you say ownership being disclosed, you do not actually mean the NFT being disclosed. The NFT is sitting right out there in public on the blockchain. What you really mean is, should there be a regulatory mechanism that says if you have Ethereum account 1234567 do you need to put your name on? And obviously, if there were to be such a rule, obviously it should not just be for NFTs. We just said NFTs are like 0.3% of the crypto asset space. You can generalize your rule and ask yourself, if you have a Bitcoin in your Bitcoin address, should you have to put your name on for public transparency? My answer would be no. We don't have any such effectively that rule in the physical world. Nobody says everyone's bank account balances have to be public. And it would seem weird that we would have to make everyone's crypto balances public. Crypto balances are closer to being public than non-crypto assets because they're sitting there public in a blockchain. People can see them. All right, if the main advantage of NFTs over coins is they represent what one owns rather than how much, I disagree with that. They can also represent how much one owns. Who or what serves as the ultimate authority guaranteeing ownership, particularly when NFTs are tied to real-world assets? As we discussed in the beginning, if NFTs are natively digital, the ultimate authority is the relevant blockchain that they're on. If they are real-world asset NFTs, the relevant authority is going to be defined in some law. It will be some off-chain authority. From what I understand, even if one can be fully certain they own a verified NFT, there isn't a guaranteed way to confirm the authenticity and provenance of the underlying digital or physical asset. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this suggests that while ownership can be secured on-chain, the value of the NFT may still depend on the legitimacy of the asset it represents. In your view, how does this uncertainty affect the perceived value of NFTs, and what types of mechanisms, protocols, or safeguards, both off-chain and on-chain, could realistically be implemented to protect buyers and authentic creators, particularly given the challenges in pursuing fraud for inauthentic assets? As we said, physical assets require off-chain enforcement. Digital assets, this is a question that I get from a lot of people who are not active in NFTs. And it's a fake news type of question if you're active in NFTs. I've bought 4,000 NFTs, I think. I think I accidentally bought a fake one once for 0.1 ETH. So 1 in 4,000, which is orders of magnitude less likely to happen than it happens in the physical art world. So I think the mechanisms, protocols, or safeguards are be modestly educated about what you're buying. I mean, it is not hard to figure out which collection is actually Fidenzas, to figure out which is actually squiggles, to figure out which actually are nuclear nerds. A little bit of poking around online, you can figure out which is right. All right. Since the majority of information about NFTs is stored on IPFS, Interplanetary File System, and the network relies on Filecoin as an incentive mechanism, are there potential risks of malicious activity or centralization in this ecosystem? I would say there are potential risks that over time the incentives are not aligned for people to continue to keep storing them. But IPFS in particular has an excellent way out. Anyone can serve an IPFS link. So let's say you have some valuable IPFS stored NFTs, and you're worried that the network is not going to support them in the future. You can run an IPFS node, store those specific images, and serve them yourself. Question NFTs. Will NFTs remain primarily digital art speculative assets, or will they evolve into broader utility tokens? Yes, both. I mean, arguably the single most successful NFT of all time is ENS, Ethereum Name Service. It is absolutely a utility token. It is effectively domain names for Ethereum. Those domain names are represented by NFTs because the domain name punk6529.eth is different than the domain name 6529.eth. It cannot be represented by a fungible coin. It has to be represented by an NFT. Thoughts on future and clarification. There has been a consistent and significant decline in NFT market cap and the number of active wallets since their peak in the last couple of years. In your opinion, what are the key factors driving this decline, and how do you foresee the future of NFTs? I mean, I don't think it's a consistent decline. I think there was a big peak in 2021. It's never gone back to the low levels it was before 2021, but I think it peaked at, I don't know, 30 billion, and it now bounces around 10 million. I mean, it goes to 5, it goes to 15, it goes to 7, it goes to 11. Yeah, broadly, I would say NFTs are in a bear market, I think. What are the key factors driving this? Some version of the space is still utterly and totally confused about what they are, I think. I mean, NFTs haven't managed to break out of a very small subset of crypto people who are into NFTs. So forget whether it gets normie adoption. It doesn't have crypto people adoption. And so I think they need work. All right, let me see. Other questions. Can you borrow against your NFTs? Yes, if they're good enough. So there are lending platforms for important NFTs, valuable NFTs, NFTs where there is a active secondary market, and you can borrow against them. If you own a valuable artwork, is it good to mint it and create an NFT? No, I think. I mean, like, you went and bought a painting. Very strictly speaking, if you just bought a painting without any special terms, very strictly speaking, I don't think you're allowed to mint it. When you buy a painting, you are not getting the copyright in the painting. You're getting, I think most courts would say, if there's no specific terms discussed, you're getting a non-commercial right for personal use. You do not get the right to replicate it in other mediums. If you're confused about this, ask yourself, if you bought a copy of Harry Potter, the book, do you now have the right to make Harry Potter the movie? Or do you now have the right to mint Harry Potter, the book, as an NFT and sell it to other people? And very obviously, you can think that you did not buy the copyright to the Harry Potter franchise for $15 on Amazon. And for the same reason, almost any piece of art that you have bought does not come with copyright rights. But let's say it did. Let's say you bought a piece of art, physical art, and the copyright from the artist, and the artist said, yeah, sure, mint it. I'm very meh on that. Because now you're doing a real world asset play. So now it's on chain, but the original's in your house. And me, a prospective buyer, I'm like, I don't know what condition the original's in, if it exists, and have you sold it to someone else, and is there water damage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of this stuff is mentally very painful and a gigantic nuisance to think about. And since you can avoid thinking about all these things by buying a different NFT that doesn't have all of these annoying factors, that's what people who like NFTs generally do. To buy recently introduced real-world tokens against real estate where ownership of one property is divisible into 10,000 tokens. Are there any studies that compare the price movement of the underlying property versus the price movement of the token? In other words, are there chances that the token will perform better than the underlying property? I do not know of any studies on this topic, but only because I haven't looked, so I saw that question. That question came 15 minutes ago. But I will tell you what my guess is. Unless it is extremely well designed, my expectation would be that the token will underperform the property over time. For the same reason that closed-end funds tend to underperform the underlying. Because when you buy a house, you own a house, you can do whatever you want with the house. When you own 2% of a house, I don't know, you're dependent on other people. You don't really own it. And so on and so forth. The so I would expect it to go below, unless there's some smart mechanism relating to it. Is testament allowed in NFTs? I don't know what it means, but what I would say is provenance is very important in NFTs. That's the number one thing they give you, right? They can tell you when it was minted, who owns it, who transferred it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Question has been asked again, but let's answer it one more time. And there was a reason I kept hammering on this, even though it seemed repetitive, but it's the single most biggest issue. Since there are several different platforms, I assume this means blockchains, could someone create an exact Punk 6529 token with the same content on another platform than the one where you bought it? Sure. And it would be worth zero. Because there's only one CryptoPunks contract, and everyone knows which one it is. And everything else is very obviously trivially fake. Do we have any other questions? Oh, I missed this one. Is decentralization the only portion of crypto as security secondary? I don't know how to answer that. I mean, I don't know what this means. I mean, crypto, if you know what you're doing, is almost certainly more secure than any other thing you could use. And if you don't know what you're doing, or you only half know what you're doing, is less secure. This thing that you say, like, oh, there's a security risk in crypto, is not a feature or a bug. It's a side effect of decentralization. What it means is you can't go crying to the ref if you mess up. If you accidentally make a payment on Chase, within Chase, depending on the rules and how they decide to enforce it, it is possible you could call up Chase right afterwards and say, hey, I screwed up. I didn't mean to send all my money to the bank account of, I don't know, my local pizza shop. I meant to send them $10. I sent them 10,000 bucks. And they might reverse it. If you lose your password to your online system to Chase, you can definitely get a new password. Those are the benefits of having a centralized system. Because you're not really in charge of your balance. You just have a account that allows you to have some temporary rights on that database. On a decentralized public blockchain, there are no redos. If I accidentally send 10 ETH to the middle of nowhere, it's gone. If I lose my private keys, my wallet is gone. Actually, my wallet, strictly speaking, is not gone. It's right there. I just can't access it. Is there anything interesting technologically with Cardano native tokens? I don't know. It's an NFT class. I don't know what to say about Cardano. Cardano is a weird blockchain in a variety of different ways. It combines some interesting technical perspectives with a community that is kind of isolated from the core rest of crypto in some way. It's unusual. And a lot of big words about the blockchain itself, but substantially less usage of the blockchain than how it's described by the blockchain promoters and founders and what have you. So, yeah, I don't have anything against them. I think they're, um, you know, they haven't done anything um, wrong. But they also, I think, sometimes I don't know who they is in this case, community members sometimes overstate what they're up to. But you also can't necessarily hold the blockchain accountable for things people say. I mean, people say a lot of dumb things about Bitcoin that I think would make Satoshi's hair stand on end. It's not his or her fault. Anything else? NFTs can either reside on the blockchain or be pointed at off blockchain. Okay, I'm 12 minutes over time, so I will wrap it up here. I'd like to thank you all for joining. And I'll see you next week.